Hey, this is Tiger. Welcome to my stream, and most probably for the last time with this intro and Train Sim World 3, because next week on Thursday we are getting Train Sim World 4, and yeah, I'm planning to stream 4 days straight with 2 days exploring at least two of the routes, and then to yank out my Austrian signaling tutorial and my South California Regional Rail Association, the SCRRA signaling tutorial, the Metrolink tutorial, to put it in more common terms. Hello AJ, thank you for moderating. Hello CD Radar, thank you for moderating as well. I see both of you have your swords ready and sharpened. And yes, Austria. I will start on Thursday with, well, unboxing the Austrian Vorarlberg wood. I have prepared a presentation for a tutorial about the Austrian signaling system. I have downloaded the Austrian signaling rules. But obviously I have to see what actually of that stuff is in the route, and will there be fight about what, about the 4 days, about who gets the tutorial out first? I don't know. I don't know if there will be fight. Maybe until then we have all used the editor and built in some shooting and fighting elements into the train simulator. No. Well, today, last time on Train Sim World 3, and first the disclaimer, we are talking about playing a computer game, not running real trains, so please leave the real trains and railway installations to the professionals. It is dangerous and super annoying if we dilettantes interfere with that. Nevertheless, always we are trying to understand as thoroughly as possible the regulatory framework and the, well, technology involved in running the train's signaling safety systems. What I wanted to do today is to come back to one of the core routes of Train Sim World 3, to, well, more or less take our bows here and pay respect to the Cajon Pass route with one alternative locomotive, the F7 in the Santa Fe livery. What is a beautiful locomotive, but quite challenging to handle down Cajon Pass. I tried it or the day before yesterday once, and well, it works, but it is a bit shaky. And why do we want to do this? Because I want to talk about emergency brake equipment on single pipe air brakes, Westinghouse brake type, on American freight trains especially. And talking about emergency brakes, I'm not sure whether I start with the service or I think I will go into a train first and have an emergency brake application on a modern locomotive. Did your messages go through? I kinda DC'd for a second, says AJ. I only got you good evening, Alice. No more messages. No more messages. So, where is it? Cajon Pass, and there is this weird lag. If you go on the timetable on Cajon Pass, it always takes until we finally get to see the locomotives. It only happens with Cajon Pass. I'm not quite sure why that is like that, but that's what it is. AJ said, I said make a long stream. Train Sim World 3 deserves a big bang going out. Well, we will see how long it will be. First, I will play around a bit with the emergency brake equipment on a modern locomotive. For that, I chose the TE ES Evolution series locomotive that comes with Cajon Pass is the main locomotive. It's one of, I think, maybe the most modern, or at least one of the most modern American freight locomotives that we have in the game. And yeah, I want to show on the dials on the screen what happens during a emergency brake application, and then afterwards play the service with the good old F7, where everything works a bit differently. So this is our GE ES44 or something like this. It does not even say here in the pause screen what it is, but I think it is written here what exactly, what type it is. An evolution series. Here it says 44 AC4. AC for AC current, and the 4 for the environmental protection standard 4, or whatever this is. More of that kind coming from the opposite direction. It is a loud locomotive, obviously, but it is a modern locomotive. Here everything is already set. The brakes are cut in to freight, and the independent brake is applied fully. The automatic brake is at minimum application. We don't really have to do a lot. Unlike on Sam Patch Great, for example, I'm not so super happy about this being the case, because all you need to do more or less is to yank in the reverser and then release the automatic brakes, and then you can start driving. Even the brake pipe is already almost full, and well, this destroys a bit the immersion for me. But obviously people complained that it is so difficult to get the trains running here on the American freight routes, so they made it easier for those people. I will release the automatic brakes for once, and we have here our brake indicators. Equalizing reservoir is at 90, brake pipe is going to 90, at the rear it is at 84, climbing towards the 90. The flow indicator is not working on this locomotive, unfortunately. Brake cylinders, because we have the independent brake applied at 72. It's most probably a locomotive that has a multiplying valve that can increase the pressure in the brake cylinders here on the locomotive. If I release the independent brake, you can see brake cylinders drop to 0. Now we are no longer braked, but we want to have the independent brake to keep it in place. This is something that would be good to select from menu. Yes, I totally agree. I want my locomotive in a state where I have to punch in those buttons. They go all the way to make it functional, and then they set it up so that you don't need to use all the functionality that they built into the game with a lot of man hours. I'm not sure if that is the best way to go, but this is the way that the game went last year. More simple and less up to the player to find out. Well, now we have our automatic brakes, the independent train brakes released. Equalizing reservoir is at 90, brake pipe is almost at 90, at the rear it is also almost at 90, it won't go any higher. The main reservoir is at 138, close to 140. Brake cylinders on the locomotive only are applied and hold the trains in place, the train in place. The brake cylinders on the cars are, we can't see it here, but most probably are depleted or are on the way on depleting. So actually, how many ways do we have to initiate an emergency brake application? Driver side, let alone the penalty brake, we will get to that later. Obviously we have our brake handle, we can move it all the way to the right, then we get here to EMR for emergency. Release, minimum, full service, suppression, handle off, and then emergency. So this is what we usually do. We move that handle over there and then we initiate an emergency brake application. The other way that we have here, end of train rear emergency brake. We can initiate an emergency brake application from the rear. We will see it in the presentation later how this works together. And here is a cover over the switch. You have to remove it and then you can throw the switch and initiate an emergency brake application from the rear. I have found in the Code of Federal Regulations all the regulations that actually require you to have this switch, and also the cover. The cover is essential. It needs to be there, and also the tag needs to be there, otherwise this locomotive would not comply with the Code of Federal Regulations. Yeah, and the third one is that device here, the emergency brake valve for the second man. If you move it up, then you open the brake pipe here at the front without using the brake valve. So maybe let's initiate an emergency brake application using this valve here, and let's see what happens. What do we expect? We expect those three values: the equalizing reservoir, the brake pipe at the front and at the rear more or less drop to zero, and the brake cylinders to fill. For that I release the independent brake so that we can see that the brake cylinders are actually filling. And now see, what is interesting is which of those figures moves first. And I yank the handle over into emergency. And what is clearly visible is that at the rear is the value that goes to zero at first. Then at the front and the equalizing reservoir lags behind. What is quite interesting, because when we look at how an emergency brake application is actually actuated, we see that it typically should work by depleting the equalizing reservoir first. But also, if you read it up in the Code of Federal Regulations, it says that locomotives that entered service at a time at around 2001 or something, they need to have a device that links this brake valve here with the rear end emergency brake valve in a way that every time the driver moves the brake handle to emergency, also the rear end emergency brake valve is actuated, with the result that at the rear the brake pipe gets evacuated, gets depleted, and this is actually faster here happening than the the equalizing reservoir getting depleted. So this is a thing that you can find in the Code of Federal Regulations, and in preparation for this stream here I found out for the first time that this locomotive actually does it. So we have it incorporated that when moving this handle here to emergency, then the rear end emergency brake valve is actuated as well. And so the rear end goes to zero fastest and the equalizing reservoir lags behind. Also the PCS, the Pneumatic Control Switch, or sometimes referred to as the power cutout switch, gets activated, gets open, and what that means we will see that in the presentation later. I will restart because recovering the brake system always takes quite some time, especially when we want to fill our brake pipe again. And I want to show just one more, maybe since AJ said I should do a long stream, maybe have two different variants. That was initiating the emergency brake application by moving the brake lever into emergency position, and then at the same time coupled with the rear end emergency brake valve. For once Let's not cut in the safety systems. That means that the PCS, the Pneumatic Control Switch, won't activate, and use this lever here. The brake valve lever for the second man that can open the brake pipe at front and see what happens here. Because those numbers here, they will move in a different way. Did we release our brake system? Yes, the independent brake is holding us in place. I'm not activating the PCS, but I'm activating this switch over there, but in a way that we can still see the screen here. So it's typically the backspace key. Here, the emergency brake, and if I push my finger long enough, I will activate it. So see what happens. The rear end is not really at its fullest, but that does not matter. We should see something happening. I activate it, and you can see at front it drops to 0. The equalizing reservoir does not move at all, and now the rear end follows suit, and now at the rear end we are at 0.2. So there is a considerable delay until the emergency brake application starting at the front propagated to the end of the train. And since we did not activate the PCS, the equalizing reservoir actually stayed at 90. It did not follow suit in this constellation. And now, as a third example, let's see how this looks on an oldish train that entered service before 2001. And for that, I wanted to visit Sampage grade and go on an older locomotive from the same manufacturer, also a GE locomotive, the AC400CW, along to Rockwood. Maybe this one. Does not really matter. And yeah, you remember, as I said, the newer locomotives that entered service past 2001, around that time, they need to have the rear end emergency brake valve coupled with the brake lever. So here we have to set up our air brakes first. Before they work as intended. Full application of the independent, release of the automatic brake, and you can see the equalizing reservoir filling, the brake pipe filling. The brake cylinders obviously are full because we have used the independent brake. At the rear, the brake pipe is filling as well, and here the flow indicator works. On this old locomotive we have actually a working flow indicator, unlike on the modern Evolution series locomotive from Cajon Pass. At the front end, brake pipe is already filled, equalizing reservoir at the same value. At the rear will take a bit to follow suit. Again, I will not activate the safety system so that the PCS does not activate the pneumatic control switch. And we will see what happens here if I now move the handle. Can I do this and at the same time see the screen? Well, I will look at the screen and move the handle with the keyboard. So now moving, well, at the rear we are at 80. That is good enough, I think. Remember, on the Evo locomotive, moving the brake handle into emergency got the brake valve at the rear of the train open, and it was at 0 at first. Then it propagated to the front, and the equalizing reservoir actually lagging behind. See what's happening now if I move the brake lever into emergency. Equalizing reservoir is first, and then the brake pipe more or less follows suit, with the rear lagging behind a bit. So this is totally a different picture that we see here. The equalizing reservoir gets activated by the brake handle, depletes to 0, the brake pipe follows suit, first at the front and the rear lags behind a little bit. This because this locomotive does not have this connection between the rear end brake valve and the brake handle, having entered service prior to the year 2001. I don't know if this is boring for you, but I find this is quite interesting to see what different effects the different ways of initiating emergency brake thingies or applications have. Well, but now we're actually running our service, and since many services in Cajon Pass tend to be a bit lengthy, especially if you're running uphill with an underpowered train with 20 miles, 25 miles, this takes sometimes hours until you get somewhere where it is getting interesting. I started a service and drove the train up to the summit here with this beautiful F7 in the Santa Fe livery that came with, I think, the first locomotive bundle for Train Sim World 3. And we have quite heavy but not so super heavy train, 4,500 tons, with our 4 locomotives. You all know the F7 is a locomotive that comes in 2 types, the A unit and the B unit. Only the A unit has a cab. The B unit has all the other stuff that the locomotive needs, like the engine and the driving motors and the fuel tanks, but does not have a cab, so it is intended for multi-unit use and adds power. Each of those units has about 1,500 horsepower, so we are running about 6,000 horsepower here with this train. And if we look at the route, we are sitting here at the summit. We came all the way from Victorville, what is about over there, got to the summit, and now we are descending Cajon Pass. Here, this line what is the steepest one that we can find, up to 3.1 percent in gradient, and we will have to be really careful with this train so that we do not get into a runaway train scenario. What makes it maybe necessary to activate the emergency brake on the train? Well, maybe I tune down the volume a bit, that I don't have to shout all the time. Yeah, I actually made a save game getting the train here to this spot, and then I tried to get it into the default setup that you usually have when you start this locomotive, so that hopefully nothing goes wrong. You recognize this locomotive from the Clinchfield Railroad DLC, but actually the cab has been reworked in a way. The most important thing is you can see your speed clock. The honk handle is no more hanging in front of the speed clock. You can actually read the speed clock. Well, we now have a speed clock that starts at 10 miles per hour. So below 10 miles per hour you can only guess how fast you are going. And the safety systems can actually be cut in. I'm not entirely sure if this is new, and I just did not find this in the old locomotive, but now the safety pedal here has a function. So if you stand up during driving this train, you will get an emergency brake application if you don't hold this pedal pressed all the time. So this is not like the vigilance pedals that we know from modern train, that you have to let go ever so often and press them again, but this is one that you have to press down all the time, like the dead man's handle on the 1972 tube stock that we had last week. And this is obviously something that can be quite annoying if you have to do that hours on end. Yeah, so from what you can hear, sometimes drivers put some bricks on this pedal so that they did not have to have their foot on it every time or all the time. Well, let's get our train running. We have the transition selector here that we need to put into 1 for automatic transitioning. Then we don't need to move it anymore as long as we are going forward. The unit selector to 4, because as we have seen, 4 units in the consist, so that the dynamic brakes work here. The rotor valve is on freight. For the independent brake, it is on full application already. We can have some light here on those indicators. The ammeter needle, on the other hand, is almost not visible. You can almost not see it here. Let's release our automatic brakes. We have a different array of brake indicators. This is probably our equalizing reservoir here. This is the brake pipe at 90, about 90, main reservoir, and the brake cylinders 1 and 2. And what this white hand here actually does, it sometimes looks a bit like a flow indicator, but I'm not entirely sure what this is for. It is very volatile. Every time you actuate the brakes, it flies around the whole thingy. So did we forget something? We turned on the light, didn't we? Yes, the lights are on. Number lights are on as well. Then I think we can start this train. You can see the needle move. We are getting traction. We have a couple of yards to go before we go into the gradient, before we go across the cliff, more or less. You can see it on the profile here. We have a bit of even ground here, and then we are going downwards, and this will be quite steep. So I won't enter the gradient with more than 16, 17 miles per hour, I guess. And then see where we get. A modern train overtaking at this point already. We always have to factor in a couple of seconds to switch our locomotive from traction to dynamic braking. No, this is not a whistle board. This is a speed board. A bit difficult to read with this sun. We will see if we get more fog on our way down. Typically I always get fog here still, so I've never navigated Cajon Pass without getting fog on the way down. So I would actually like the train to coast. We have to go around the corner and then we will soon get to this part where we go across the cliff in the gradient. Yeah, it is safe to coast. That means I can switch the transition off and then into brake. This is always a bit shaky. Have to wait a bit until the needle appears. Because there is already the gradient. Am I getting braking power or am I not? Or am I accelerating down? No, I'm getting braking power. That is good. At the same time, I want to get the air brake into play. Minimum acceleration already. Yes. And here it starts with the gradient. You can see it's already 2.4. And we will go up to 3.1. Now she wants a drive-by. When we are going down the gradient and I have to meticulously manage my speed. We see the dynamics are not good enough to hold the train properly. I think I will allow the train to go up to 26-27 miles. With full dynamics, the train is still accelerating. That means I have to add air brakes, bail off the locomotive. And now we have about 75 to 80. And this allows us to manage the speed with the dynamic brake. Those things here, I'm not entirely sure, but I think that those are defect detectors of any kind. They're cute. I can never see the level crossing here, but apparently there is one. .8 gradient. Still getting harder. It's a manually lapping brake lever, meaning we have to move it into service to add more brake force and then back to lap to lock the air inside. .9. Still accelerating, but with full dynamics we're slowing down, so I do not necessarily want to add more air brakes, because we all know once added we cannot remove them anymore. Not until we are on even ground again, more or less. Is that a whistle board? Probably it is. Here's the crossing, isn't it? .1 gradient. That is insane. Here's the rest of your drive-by, AJ. At least part of it. Well, it should be okay to do a full one. If we get back into the cab afterwards and we are at 35 miles, then we have to use our emergency brake application. And we've got quite a train behind us. It's not that we are running light. It's 4,500 tons pushing us downhill on a 3.1% gradient with a 6,000 horsepower locomotive consist. 4 axles each. Yeah, we actually slowed down a bit. And from what I've read in an NTSB report, performance of dynamic brakes is typically calculated in dynamic brake or axles with dynamic brakes, or tons per axles with dynamic brakes. And we have a locomotive in a B setup. That means we have 2 axles per bogie, 4 axles per locomotive. That is 16 axles with dynamic braking active. Luckily in the game, the dynamic brakes never fail. So it's 30 that we can go here maximum. And to have a bit of a margin of error, I will stay at 26-27 miles to get this consist here through this part of the track. This is the train that overtook us at the summit. Can you see it? It is going the not so steep line. Or line, yes, line. But those are the things that I really like in DLCs. If you can see other trains running in a distance on a different track. Can still see it. And when we made it through this really steep part, we will reconvene with this other line. Now there is one coming from the opposite direction, uphill. That's really cool to have this traffic here. I need to pay attention because speed is climbing towards the 28. This is why I wanted to have some margin of error. And yeah, it is obviously no coincidence that I wanted to talk about emergency brake applications on the Cajon Pass DLC, since Cajon Pass is, as we probably all know, home of one of the most disastrous runaway train scenarios that happened back in the year 1989, when a Southern Pacific train was running down Cajon Pass and did not have enough brake power to manage speed, and the train go faster and faster, and in San Bernadino derailed in a curve with a speed limit of 35 miles, actually running at a speed of about 110 miles per hour with disastrous effects. And we will get back to one of the conclusions that the NTSB, the National Transportation Safety Board, wrote into their report afterwards, that it is not the greatest idea to cut out dynamic brakes as soon as an emergency brake application is actuated. Because at the time, the PCS, the Pneumatic Control Switch, that we have seen in action at the beginning of the stream, shut down the dynamic brakes together with all the other electric traction equipment. And then the train only had the air brakes left, and running at a high speed, the air brakes were not enough, or not nearly enough, to slow down the train, with the effect that the brakes melted the wheels off the axles actually. Now we're here back together with the other line. I think here on the left is actually the town called Cajon. That is the namesake for this pass here. And I think, yeah, soon enough we will get to the point where the speed limit increases. And then we can also increase our speed a bit and go at about 32 miles or something. Look at that, we're getting a lot of traffic. Here is it the train that went the long way around and is now overtaking us for the second time? That would be cool. Oh, it is already almost past us. And now, since the gradient is lessening a bit, 1.9, it is a good thing that we did not apply too much air brakes, because otherwise we are getting in the danger of stalling our train, and then we have to stop, secure the train, release the brakes. Because as we have learned in the video about the single pipe air brakes, our brakes are single release and depletable. That means we should not do a running release, because otherwise we might not be able to get our air brakes on fast enough. Are we in the? Yeah, we are already in the speed increase area. That means we can allow the train to pick up a couple of more clicks to get to about 32. But don't underestimate the track that follows here. It will always be at about 2.0, 2.2% downhill. And that is a lot. So there is no point in accelerating to 45 or 50 miles. We will never be able to hold our train. And we have talked about this a couple of times. The idea is to apply just as much air brake to be able to manage the speed with the dynamic brakes in the range that is necessary for the track that we are going on. Not enough air brakes will lead to a runaway train. Too much air brakes will stall the train. So we will have to find a proper setting for it. And this is additional difficult because we can increase the air brake power, but we cannot decrease it anymore because our brakes are single release. This is why we always want to be careful with adding air brakes, but not too careful, because then We're getting too fast. And obviously the faster we're running, the more brake we need to keep the train at a certain speed. Now there's a train actually from the opposite direction. I dim my headlight. It's nice enough. The other guy actually switched the lights off altogether. That is not what the operating rules say. But well, this is something that he has to figure out. I like that the other train is still in front of us, visible. But we're really lucky with the AI traffic here. A lot of trains running parallel. This is not a good camera position, is it? Here, by the way, our end of train device where the rear brake valve is for the emergency brake application that is actuated from the rear. It does not help us a lot on this locomotive because we do not have an head of train device, so this end of train device can radio us a lot, but we are not able to read it. Oh, I'm sorry for the shouting. This is because this locomotive is really loud and I almost do not hear my own word. I apologize for the shouting. No, I do not have the rail driver. I'm using keyboard controls mainly. And welcome to the chat, Dewbird. So I'm mainly using keyboard controls for the stuff that I need all the time, and I really like to use the handles and valves and stuff that are modeled in the game, in the cab. This is why I don't think that I would enjoy driving with a rail driver. Are you using the rail driver? I thought there was a second level crossing, but it's those thingies for the defect detectors. Now the other train is actually running away. But that's okay. I don't want to go much faster than 32, 33. The other train with its modern locomotive has more power in the dynamic brakes. And it's a rather short train anyway. We have a manifest train, that means a mixed freight train with box cars. And these open cars. The train that derailed so badly in San Bernadino was a hopper car train with some mineral stuff. It was super heavy. Traino or something was... forgot the name. Stones, more or less, hopper cars full with stones. And the yard guys at the yard where the train left, they told the engineer in the papers that the train was around 6,000 tons, and later it got established that the train was actually more than 9,000 tons. So that is, well, the main reason, according to the NTSB report, for the derailment and why the driver was not able to manage the speed downhill. Another thing was that the dynamic brakes on more than half of the locomotives in the consist were not functional or not fully functional. Without the lead engineer knowing. And if you look in the specifications in the Code of Federal Regulations, you find a lot of requirements that if dynamic brakes are not functional on a locomotive, you need big stickers that cannot be removed, telling everyone that the dynamic brakes on this locomotive are not functional. Again, where is the level crossing? Is that the level crossing? Hard to see. Yeah, I think that now that we are getting in the part where the valley opens up, we're getting already in the outskirts of San Bernadino. I think this is a good time to cut in the presentation about the emergency brake equipment on, single pipe indirect automatic air brakes like on American freight trains. I'm coming back to the presentation that we had in a previous video about the single pipe indirect automatic air brake, and we learned at that time that the brake force actually gets transferred by brake shoes or brake blocks that are pressed against the wheels, and then the traction of the blocked wheels on the rail slows the train down. How the shoes are pressed against the wheels is done by brake cylinders, pneumatic cylinders with a piston, and when the piston extracts, goes out of the cylinder, then it presses with a rigging that I did not paint or draw or did not draw in this presentation. Then the piston over a rigging presses the brake shoes against the wheels. For that we need to put air into the brake cylinders, and this air runs through the whole train with one single brake pipe. One pipe to rule them all, one pipe to feed them. Unlike on a two-pipe system, we have one pipe to control the status of the brake cylinders and at the same time provide the air for directing it into the brake cylinders. We control the brake pipe air pressure with our brake valve in the cab, and we have learned that in every car, in every vehicle, there is a control valve, a triple valve that decides or controls what happens with the air according to the status of the brake pipe, according to the pressure that is in the brake pipe. And what can it do? It can allow air go from the brake pipe into the auxiliary reservoirs, that are reservoirs in every vehicle that we keep there, so that every vehicle has their own supply of air that can go into the brake cylinders if needed. So we don't have to send the air for filling the brake cylinders along the whole brake pipe with every brake application, but we have the air on every vehicle, so that if the train is separated at some point, the vehicles that got separated can still brake with the air in their auxiliary reservoirs. So where do we get the air from? We have the main reservoir on the locomotive typically, and with the brake valve we are connected to the main reservoir and the brake pipe, and we can control main reservoir air go into the brake pipe and into the auxiliary reservoirs, and a compressor on the locomotive provides the air in the main reservoir, so it catches the air from the atmosphere and crams it into the main reservoir, and this is where we have the highest pressure, and this is where all the air for our system comes from. Looking closer at the brake valve, we have learned in the last stream that we do not control the pressure in the brake pipe directly with our brake valve here, but we have our equalizing reservoir cut in between. So what we do with the brake valve when we are moving it from release to full service, we are actually modulating the pressure in the equalizing reservoir. Why do we do that? Because the equalizing reservoir is a much shorter and smaller circuit, so it reacts faster. We can much faster get to the point where we see now we have the pressure reduction that we are aiming for, and we can stop applying the brakes or moving the handle around, because the brake pipe, it tends to be a tad slow with adjusting to what we do with our brake handle, and there are those movements back and forth, the serpentine movements in the brake pipe. So all this we don't have in our small little equalizing reservoir. So we set the pressure in the equalizing reservoir, and then the equalizing reservoir circuit is connected with the brake pipe via a relay valve, and the relay valve is also connected to the main reservoir air, and the relay valve makes that the brake pipe pressure always follows suit with the equalizing reservoir pressure. So we control with the brake valve the pressure in the equalizing reservoir, make a reduction of 10 pounds, for example, and then the relay valve makes the brake pipe follow suit, and then this reduction is just transferred to the brake pipe a bit slower, but at the same rate. Yeah, and then the control valves, we have looked at the control valves, what they can do. They are more or less, we have talked about that the earliest version of those triple control valves were set up in a way a bit like this. What reference are you loving, AJ? The loving with the one pipe to rule them all, maybe. Well, back to our control valves. The control valve actually have to decide whether the air goes from the brake pipe into the auxiliary reservoir, or whether the auxiliary reservoir air goes into the brake cylinder, and whether the air that is maybe in the brake cylinder can go out into the atmosphere. Those are the three things that the triple valves, the control valves, needs to do. And how are they doing it? We have on the earliest version this type of valve with a piston head, and a slide valve, and the brake pipe pressure pushes against this piston head here, and if the brake pipe pressure is full, the piston is at its rightmost position here, and then the air can go into the auxiliary reservoir, while the brake cylinder is connected via this tunnel here with the atmosphere, so that any air in the brake cylinder can go out into the atmosphere, while air from the brake pipe can go through this filling port here slowly into the auxiliary reservoir. This is why we call this the release and recharge position. So if you want to hear that in length and with more explanations, then I invite you to watch the video about the single pipe indirect air brake system with the equalizing reservoir and the control valves discussed. So this is the status of our brake system if we have the automatic brake handle into release. Then we release because we allow all the air in the brake cylinders to go out into the atmosphere. The one pipe, as last time I said one pipe to rule them all, one pipe to feed them, one pipe to screw it up if you really need them, because that is the problem with the single release and maybe the possibility to deplete your air, right? But let's hope that we don't screw it up. What happens now if we want to perform an emergency brake application? It starts more or less in a system that looks a bit like this. We have everything fully released. That means we have a brake pipe pressure of 90. This is this orange stuff here, because we have an equalizing reservoir pressure of 90. The auxiliary reservoir, because it is connected with this port, fills up to 90 as well, and the brake cylinders are at 0. So they are depleted. Our auxiliary reservoirs are filled. The brake pipe is at its maximum. Obviously, towards the end of the train, we lose a bit because we cannot get the air to the end of the brake pipe at this constant ratio, but then it is at 87 or 83 or 82 or whatever. At least this is the highest pressure in the brake pipe that we can get, as well as in the auxiliary reservoirs. Now, if we put our brake handle into emergency, what happens now? The first thing what happens is that we deplete our equalizing reservoir to 0. So we can connect this circuit for the equalizing reservoir with the atmosphere, and then through a hole all the air goes out. And then the relay valve does its job, and it also depletes the brake pipe at the front first, and then at the end, towards the end. So every car is more or less the next one in line. So it is like one car tells it to the next, oh, there was a brake application, hey, there was a brake application. And well, you can imagine that it takes some time actually to propagate to the end of the train. So this is the classic thing that we have seen on the sandpatch grade locomotive, the AC44, no, CW, I think that was the name of the locomotive. What took some time to propagate. First, depleting the equalizing reservoir, then the brake pipe following suit from the front end to the rear end, obviously. And what does our control valve do at this point? Now here is no pressure, but on this side of the piston is a lot of pressure from the auxiliary reservoir, so the piston is moved to its leftmost position, opening up this tunnel here so that the auxiliary reservoir air can go through this room here into the brake cylinder and fill the brake cylinder up to the point where the pressure in the auxiliary reservoir and the brake cylinder equalizes. And this is, well, depends on the layout of the system. Here I chose a value of 35 just for example, but this is totally up to the layout of the brake system. So that will be the emergency brake application. Simple, by moving the handle into the emergency position and then applying it via the equalizing reservoir brake pipe all along the train using the auxiliary reservoir air that we have. That is quite good, but it is not good enough. We want it to have a bit faster and a bit stronger, the brake application, because it is an emergency brake application after all. So we have already seen at the beginning of the stream that we do not have the brake handle to do that, but we also have those emergency brake valves in the cap. That is at where the second man is. It is more or less like a bottle cap. I don't know if you know those old beer bottles that have the cap on a metal gearing so that you can thump it open, and this is more or less the same principle for those valves. You can just open the brake pipe and then obviously the air goes out, and this we have at the front end, and yeah, this would be the emergency brake valve, and we have it at the back end, because if we open the brake pipe at both ends of our mile-long line, then obviously the air can go out on both ends, and that is faster than if the air has to travel all the way and go out at the front end. This is why we also typically, at least, we don't have it on the train that we are running at the moment, but with a head-off train device, we typically have a switch where we can radio the end of train device or a locomotive sitting at the end of the train to open the brake pipe on their end, and then obviously it gets faster. And we have seen on the Evolution series locomotive, being a new locomotive, entered service later than 2001, moving the brake handle into emergency also actuates the emergency brake valve at the end of the train, leading to a much faster application of the air brakes. So those are the three things that we can do to speed up the process, but it is still not fast enough. The air needs to propagate, needs to go out on both ends. Wouldn't it be nice if we can open it on every vehicle? And yes, we can do that. I have read and heard names for those thingies. They are called, in this context, a number 8 valve. And what does the number 8 valve do? The number 8 valve more or less detects if the brake pipe pressure drops very fast. In a normal service application, the brake pipe pressure drops, but not that fast, but slowly. And then this valve does nothing. But if the pressure drops fast, like in an emergency application, then this valve detects this and opens the brake pipe at its end so that the air can go out at this point as well, and then it runs along the train like a firecracker. It is initiated at one end, goes to the next car, this valve detects it, opens the brake pipe here, and on the next car again, oh, brake application, emergency brake, poof, open the brake pipe, oh, emergency brake application, open it. And so bam, 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 along the line from both ends until they meet in the middle. And this speeds up things a lot. So how can these valves work? Obviously, those valves develop over time as well. One simple layout of the early days would be you have more or less a vessel that is connected to the brake pipe, and you have a piston that, well, shuts this room so that the pressure cannot go out. When the brake pipe is charged at 90 psi, we have a little port in this piston so that the air can travel through here. And this fills this chamber on the lower side. If we lower the brake pipe pressure slowly, like in a service brake application, then the air on the lower part can go through this port and just equalize with the upper room, and the piston does not move at all. Not so if we go back to a fully charged system here, and the pressure in the brake pipe drops suddenly, fast. then the port is too small. All the air that is bottled up down here cannot go through the port fast enough, and this moves the piston to the top, at the same time pulling the plug here so that the air can go around the piston head and out of the brake pipe at this spot here. And this is an early version of this. I'm quite sure modern valves of that time work differently, probably with diaphragms or something like this, but the principle is still the same. The valve detects that the pressure is dropping fast, not slowly like in a service application, but fast like in an emergency brake application, and then the car initiates this amplifying effect and opens the brake pipe here, and so it goes like a chain reaction along the whole train. Yeah. What else do we have? And then, yeah, what we have seen, then obviously this goes to zero as well. Another thing that is very typical for American freight trains, we have seen that the highest pressure that we can achieve with this setup here on the brake cylinder is the same pressure that remains in the auxiliary reservoir, because obviously as soon as the brake cylinder here is at the same pressure as the auxiliary reservoir, no more air has any reason to travel from the auxiliary reservoir into the brake cylinder, but then everything stays what it is. And to add some extra punch here and to get some more pressure into the brake cylinders, American freight cars typically have a second vessel here that is sometimes connected to the auxiliary reservoir, but there is a dividing wall, and this is an emergency reservoir. This is a special extra reservoir that is also filled alongside with the auxiliary reservoir from the brake pipe if the system is in release and recharge, but the air here is typically not used. It is only used to pump it into the brake cylinder if an emergency brake application is initiated, and for that earlier versions of those control valves had a special portion, the emergency portion, that worked a bit like those number 8 valves that I drew up here, also detecting a sudden drop in brake pipe pressure and then allowing the air in the emergency reservoir to go into the brake cylinder, whereas the other part of the control valve was then called the service portion. And then we have about, at least this is what I've read and heard in videos, 20% more brake cylinder pressure. This is why I increased it from 35 to 42. So that we can tap this extra air in the emergency reservoir, but only during an emergency application. And control valves that have those dedicated 2 portions for service and emergency are at least what I have found, are those AB valves. We have talked about that. Obviously, these control valves evolved and got more and more sophisticated over time, starting with very simple valves of that kind here, the KD valves, and then with the addition of the emergency portion we had the AB valves, and after that we got the ABD valves and the ABDW, ABDX, ABDXR, ABDXL, or whatever they have now in the catalog of Webtec. A control valve with those portions here for emergency and service, at least from what I have read, is the AB variant of that. Newer versions of those control valves, they merge the emergency portion and the service portion on one end using diaphragms, so that we don't have that many moving parts, no slide valves anymore, and then we can put it into one half, and then on the other side of the pipe bracket there is a thing that is the quick release portion that actually uses some air of this emergency reservoir, not for emergency braking but for quicker release, actually allowing some air in this emergency reservoir to go back into the brake pipe so that the train can release the brakes faster. But that is a different story, and maybe we'll talk about this in a different video. For now, I want to discuss what special things happen during an emergency brake application, and this is not only a different ways of actuating it, amplifying it, accelerating it with the number 8 valves, and adding more pressure into the brake cylinders by tapping the emergency reservoirs that are on the freight trains. A very important thing that is connected with the brake pipe is the pneumatic control switch, the PCS, sometimes also called the power cutout or cut-off switch. Also works with PCS. And what does it do? It cuts off the power. Applying brakes is nice, applying them fast and hard is even nicer, but this only is half the fun if the train is still trying to accelerate and apply traction. So we want obviously to cut off traction when we are applying our emergency brake application, and for that the pneumatic control switch detects this sudden drop of pressure in the brake pipe and turns the prime mover, the diesel engine, to idle. So actually the governor is set to idling, and it also gets all the energy out of the generator so that we do not have any electric energy running in our system anymore, and then the traction motors don't get any energy anymore and it is lost. And the problem, and this is what we had in the San Bernardino train disaster, is that this kills our dynamic brakes, because the dynamic brake obviously rely on our traction motors turning the turning force into electric energy, and then the electric energy is burned into the rheostats or fed back into the grid if it is possible on regenerative braking. But if we turn off all the electrics in the train, then we kill our dynamic brakes when the PCS is activated. And up until 1989, this was actually state of the art. This locked the dynamic brakes off. So when in the San Bernardino train disaster, the train was running much too fast, and the dynamics brakes, together with some air brakes maybe, were not able to slow the train down or manage speed. At some point, the engineer in the helper pair at the back of the train initiated an emergency brake application, and this, obviously did all what we have discussed here. Pumped air, all the air that was left in the train, into the brake cylinders and cut out the remaining dynamic brakes, with the effect that the train traveling at that speed was not able to be slowed down by the air brakes, even with the brake cylinders trying at their hardest, and this resulted in melting the wheels of the axles, actually, because the speed was just too high and could not be taken out of the train with the air brakes alone. And in the NTSB report, it is stated that this is not a good idea to always kill the dynamic brakes if there is an emergency brake application. I tried to find the regulations since then, because I heard somewhere that it changed sometimes in one or the other direction, but I did not really find some hard proof for it. But I just want us to be aware of the problem that when activating the PCS in an emergency brake application, we can actually kill our dynamic brakes. It is possible to recover the dynamic brakes by recovering the PCS, just like after every emergency brake application that throws the pneumatic control switch, but you have a cooldown that you have to wait 60, 70 or 90 seconds, and then put the handle into emergency or handle off or service or suppression, depends on the locomotive. And well, it takes some nerves to do that in a runaway train scenario. I'm quite sure to think, okay, I have to wait 90 seconds and then I got my dynamic brakes back. That is the thing with the pneumatic control switch. What else can happen in an emergency brake application? Emergency sanding. Some locomotives, not all of them, activate sanding during an emergency brake application to increase the adhesion between the wheels and the track. What can be a good idea. Otherwise, the emergency brake application will lead to severe wheel slips. And that is what, well, we don't want, because as soon as the wheels are slipping, we are not slowing down anymore, or at least not properly. Yeah, last thing, we have talked about driver-initiated emergency brake applications. Obviously, the same thing can happen if the train separates, or if there is a leakage in the brake pipe. Then we have a sudden drop in brake pipe pressure that can result into an emergency brake application. And then we always have the penalty brake, like we're going too fast, or we are not satisfying the alerter because we fell asleep, or on this locomotive we are letting go of the safety pedal, or in case we have some speed control system connected with cab signals like the ATC of the old Chicago and Northwestern, then this can activate the penalty brake. And where does this actually fit into all this? We have a valve that is typically connected in the equalizing reservoir circuit. It is called a P for penalty 2A valve, and this valve can translate all these situations into draining the equalizing reservoir to zero. So this valve actually can do the same thing that we can do with our brake handle here. We drain the equalizing reservoir, and then the chain reaction runs through the brake system and applies the brakes. And this is, yeah, it can also vent the equalizing reservoir to the atmosphere. And this initiates the penalty brakes. And to prevent this valve from doing this, we have this suppression setting on our brake valve, or on most brake valves. Actually, when we are putting our brake handle into suppression, that I'm telling this P2A valve, yes, I know I'm too fast, but I am doing everything that is reasonable to slow down the train. Please don't activate an emergency brake application. So if we put the handle into suppression, then we are, well, slowing down properly, and then the P2A valve says, okay, at least now he's reacting, I won't pop the brake pipe. Let's see and hope that what the driver is doing, what the engineer is doing, is enough. So that was, I think, what I wanted to talk about today, about the emergency brake application and what is connected with that. I think this is a really interesting topic, and there is much more to just, well, applying the brakes to full extent. And now we can try to get our train home. I have half a mind of doing a emergency brake application later to see how we can recover when we have an emergency brake application in a gradient, because that poses or gives us a lot of difficulties. Stopping the train in a gradient downhill with a emergency brake application obviously gives us the problem that we have to recharge our brake system without the train rolling downhill. And there are a couple of procedures how this can be done. And maybe we try this later. This time I want to resist the temptation of going too fast. Not like in my last Cajon Pass video. The piece of track where this train derailed in 1989 is not represented in the game, by the way, because it did not go to San Bernadino the way that we are going to San Bernardino, but on a different track. It was coming down Cajon Pass, but then going a different track. Like, where is our map here? This is where we are at the moment, and you can see this line that is running parallel to where we are running, and in the game it stops here. In real life it actually goes on and comes into San Bernardino like this, approximately like this, and the disaster happened here at the southern end of Duffy Street. That's why it's sometimes called the Duffy Street incident. Yeah, and here it always looks as if we are running on level ground, more or less. But we are going downhill 2.2%. And if you think back at San Patch Grade, for example, how steep 2.2% are in a gradient. So this is a bit deceiving here, because the valley is so wide and open. Look how the volumetric clouds are sitting in the hills. Isn't that nice? And for once there is no fog. Let's see if we're getting any adverse signals before we go into San Bernardino. Sometimes we have to wait because another train is taking precedence. Yes, we've got a flashing yellow over red. What is an approach medium telling us we mustn't pass the next signal faster than 40. It's weird, right? In most systems the flashing yellow is a advanced approach. In the BNSF signaling rules, if I remember correctly, it is an approach medium. But actually what you need to do is not so much different. Again, it looks as if you're just rolling on the flat, but you're shooting downhill with 2.2%. Actually stopped raining. Hubert is asking, am I a railroader in real life? Perfect explanations. Thank you very much. No, I'm not. Part of my professional duties deal with the investigation of traffic accidents, including railroad accidents. Now we are passing an approach. We need to slow down to 30 and prepare to stop at the next signal. But I'm not a railroader, no. But thank you very much for the perfect explanations. So, we are approaching a red light at this point here. We got an approach signal. That means we have to slow down to 30 and prepare to stop our train in front of the next signal. What is obviously not so easy when we are running down the gradient. Here it is not that steep at the moment, but after the next wave in the track, it will be steep again. The problem is, if we apply more air brakes, then we will probably not be able to get the train moving again after we will stall it on our way to the red signal. This is why I just keep the air brakes on and max the dynamics and see where we can get. AJ, if you're still awake and think back to our last video on Cajon Pass, the next signal was actually the one where we sped it. What is still haunting me. So let's see if our train stalls here. I did not change the air brake setting, but I slowed down the train with the dynamics, and since we are now at a much slower speed, obviously the air brakes slow the train down more than they did when we were traveling with 30 or 32. So let's see if we can manage the speed still with this setting here. Now the driver assist is mixing itself in. Well, driver assist, thank you very much. I'm using the throttle for providing dynamic brakes on this F7. I don't want to apply power. Good Lord. At least the locomotive knows what we are trying to achieve. Since the center of mass of the train went over this edge and into another 2.2 downhill spell, the train accelerated again. And let's see if we can manage the speed with the dynamics in a way that allows us to stop in front of the next signal. Train doesn't really want to slow down. I know that we still have some track until we get to the next signal. But even with the dynamics full on, we can't really slow down. So we will probably have to add some more air brakes when we're getting closer to this signal. The rain is certainly not helping, as it provides for less adhesion on the track. We're going through a left bend, then we're going in a right bend, and the signals are just behind. So I applied some more air brakes. Bailed off, at least I tried, now I did it completely. Bailed off the brakes on my locomotive so that the dynamic brakes can work. And now with the dynamic brakes I can slow the train down even further. Still, I don't want to stall the train. This is always the problem with applying too much air brakes. We will stall the train. We're still, well, not in a so hard gradient anymore. But obviously the problem is, if I release the brakes now, the train will pick up speed quite fast. And then we have no way of stopping in front of the signal. But what happens? Train is stalled. We're still in a pretty steep gradient. What can we do now? So I don't have to do my emergency brake application. I stalled my train in approaching the signals. Now it is not moving anymore. We're sitting in a gradient. The signals are just around this corner here. Last time we went here, we were too fast. And then we were going this way and the signals are red, and then we spat it out here. Boof. Now we stalled the train before getting there. How can we manage this? Getting the train moving again, sitting in a gradient, because as soon as I release the brakes we will start picking up speed. One thing is to try if the independent brake is enough to hold the train when we release. But what if it is not? Then the train is rolling. I have my brake system not charged, I won't get the dynamics up fast enough. So what is probably the safe way to do it? We send our crew. This is Hank typically. You all remember Hank. To secure handbrakes. There are rules. How many handbrakes do we need to fasten on a train of this and that weight? Well, I keep it a bit simple and apply like 4 or 5 every second car. And let's say we applied more. I think it is enough now. Independent brake fully applied. Releasing. We can see our brake pipe pressure climbing back to the 90. But obviously we need to wait until this happened throughout the whole train. And then comes the difficult part actually. What happens if we release the handbrakes and the independent brake again? Probably the train will start rolling. But how can Hank release the handbrakes when the train is rolling? So probably we will move our automatic brake into some setting that in addition with the independent brake still holds the train, and if I remove the independent brake, the train will stop rolling again. If somebody knows a better procedure or actually knows how it is done in real life, don't hesitate to put it in the comments. At the moment I'm just waiting for the brake pipe to fill, and then I move it into first service. Obviously I'm not bailing off the locomotive brake cylinders at the moment because we have the independent brake still on. So that would not be the idea. And then we send Hank to release the handbrakes. And if the train starts rolling again, before Hank is back, then he has to stay here. From what I've learned about this route is that the very first McDonald's restaurant ever is just on the left side of this track here. Oh, see, it is... Is it already moving? No, it is not moving. The train is bunching up and leaning against the locomotive. With the handbrakes released now, the cars are going into the buffers, but the train is still sitting. So Hank can come back on the locomotive. And then let's see. If we can't move after removing the independent brake, then probably we have to power brake a bit until we move again. So, releasing, bailing off, and the train is moving. Still quite slowly because we have the automatic brakes. Are we getting? We are getting something from our dynamic brake, even though the player assist tells us that we should release the brakes first, but obviously we don't want to do that. So, and now we still need a bit more air brakes. Can you see how this train is pushing us? It is crazy. Even though it is just a little gradient. Worst that can happen is that we stall again. And then we have to repeat the procedure. But maybe we have to stop in front of the signal anyway. Unless it's switched in the meantime. Still moving at the moment. But we stalled again. So, a bit more than initial reduction, but not that much as I applied. So I picked a different set of handbrakes now. Yes, we are stable. Waiting for the system to charge. Operating rules probably say that we have to wait for a couple of minutes for this to happen. I don't want to use the number 8 camera to see if the signal switched, because it will be a nice surprise. Okay. Let's say we've waited a couple of minutes. First service. Hank, go release the handbrakes, please. I hope you remember which one you applied. Did you apply this one? No. This one I skipped. And that should be the last. Hank is back on the locomotive. Now let's see. A lap. Let's see if that is enough. Red is good. And now we're crawling to the signal. At a steady speed without stalling. But still being able to stop the train as soon as we see the signal. We need a bit more. But we see the signal has cleared. We're getting a diverging clear. That means it is okay to let the train accelerate. Well, procedures of that kind get your train moving again after an emergency brake application in a gradient, I guess. Even without a running release. Interesting enough, there is another train waiting on the other end. Waiting for us to pass. But I think this shows how delicate the air brake system is when you're running down a gradient with a train like this. And how careful you need to be to increase the reduction in your air brake system. Yeah, I guess we don't need to add more air brakes. We should be good with the dynamics that we have. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, over there, somewhere over there, there is the very first McDonald's restaurant that ever was and now is a museum. So if anyone is interested. Or maybe it was around the next bend. Not entirely sure anymore. We're already in the vicinity of San Bernadino station. everything on the top left is no longer counting in miles but in feet. Talking about feet, well, I can't show you on this locomotive, obviously. Now I turn to the right. And then we get into San Bernadino station, and we will pass through the station, through the passenger part of the station. Let's dim our lights. Oh, they were already dimmed because of the other train. See, all those trains had to wait for us to finally come in. It is not a red light issue, it was us over braking. Oh, McDonald's, says CD Radar. So, the funny thing at this station is that we are now going across a little hill, as you can see here, when we are going into our parking position, and then downhill again. So this is probably actually time for a running release here. The gradient should allow. We're actually going uphill. And we even might have to go back to applying throttle or traction, so that we're not sitting here in the station area forever. Again, the flashing yellow over red, that now as a dwarf signal. Not more than 40 at the next. Well, and expect diverging, it's not a problem. We won't run through the station with 40 as a freight train here. Well, you can't complain that there is not enough going on in the station areas. There's so many cars and trains sitting about. So now we're going to the left. I think we don't need any throttle anymore. It should be across that hill and on the downward slope already. No, but we're slowing down still. Well, let's coast and see if we get the center of mass across. Don't really want to get a runaway train scenario here at the station. Or at the yard, more like. End of our train still has to go across the top. Well then. Slower than 10 miles I don't want to go. Here's the approach. Warning us that we have to stop at the next signal. Or I guess we don't really get to the next signal because we will reach our stopping position before we get there. By the way, why do they allow... Oh, I'm still not across the summit. In this case, I will apply some more throttle. Otherwise, this will take too long. Now the needle is going beyond the 10. So, I think now we can let the train coast into position and then use the air brakes to stop it. End of the train is still around, is still in the corner or in the bend. Oh, that looks nice. Yeah. And now the train is picking up speed because we're going downhill. And to not overshoot the mark, we have to find the proper setting for the air brakes. In the end, we might want to do some stretch braking, even if the driver assist complains. But we want the slack in the train to go out. Yeah, but that is too early. Got to release the brakes once more. Yes, AJ, another train that I need some more practice to run it a bit more smoothly. No, you didn't say anything. But as I told you earlier, with this old locomotive, this heavy train down Cajon Pass is actually, I think, maybe for the driving, one of the most challenging parts in the game. Yes, but obviously I don't want to stall all the time. And then I want to slide it down the pass in a way that it just stops out of its own accord directly on the zero in point. The driver assist is no friend of power braking. Damn it, it's stalling again, 78 feet in front of the mark. But we're getting there. Alright. That was that. So, the only point where we got close to the speed limit was here in the really steep part. And, well, no, that was the beginning here. That was the really steep part. We started here. This was where my save game started. All the other part I did in preparation for the stream. Well, at least we did not overspeed. We got where we are supposed to be. And it is raining again. We did not derail. We did not create a runaway train scenario. We did not run a red signal. We did not spad. And we got the train on the track where it is supposed to be. Well, where is the time? 2 hours, 22 minutes and 22 seconds. This is a nice time for ending the stream, maybe. As I said, maybe the last Train Sim World 3 stream. Next week I will be back on Thursday with the first impressions from Train Sim World 4 if everything works out, and on the weekend then with tutorials about the Austrian signaling and the Metrolink signaling. I hope you enjoyed a bit the clumsy handling of the old F7 down Cajon Pass and the explanations about the emergency brake installations on the train. Thank you very much for moderating, AJ and CD Radar. Thank you for bearing with me, and take care. Have a good time, and until next time, thank you.